Millions embark on cruise ships every year, chasing dreams of endless ocean horizons, luxury entertainment, and tropical destinations. But sometimes, beneath the festive surface, darkness lurks. A sinister undercurrent of tragedy, mystery, and supernatural terror that can strike when least expected. These are not mere rumors or urban legends. Each story you're about to hear is rooted in real, documented events drawn from official reports, first-hand Reddit accounts, and news archives. Some involved abrupt disappearances, unexplained deaths, chilling ghost encounters, or disasters that changed lives forever. Tonight, we drift far from the comfort of poolside cocktails, diving into the chilling truth behind the most disturbing cruise ship horror stories, each one more unsettling than the last. Prepare yourself. Paradise can turn to nightmare in a heartbeat. Let's move to our first story, the vanishing passenger. Cruise ships represent freedom, the promise of escape from everyday life on vast, endless seas. Yet, for some, these floating paradises become the site of haunting disappearances that defy explanation. Among the most disturbing cases are those of passengers who simply vanish. No trace, no warning, and often no resolution. According to the United States Coast Guard and maritime incident databases, an estimated 300 people have gone missing from cruise ships worldwide since 1995. This figure isn't widely publicized in official tourism brochures, but it's well documented in investigative reports and Coast Guard statistics. Most of these cases remain unsolved, leaving behind families desperate for answers and authorities grappling with accusations of negligence. What sets cruise ship disappearances apart from other missing persons cases is the environment itself. A self-contained world surrounded by the sea, often hundreds of miles from land. When a passenger vanishes, the logistics of investigation and rescue become exponentially more difficult. Amy Lynn Bradley was a 23-year-old American woman who vanished while vacationing with her family aboard Royal Caribbean's Rhapsody of the Seas in March 1998. Her disappearance remains one of the most widely discussed unsolved cruise ship mysteries to this day. Amy's story begins like any other family vacation. She was on a week-long trip with her parents and younger brother, set to explore the Caribbean islands. Amy was athletic, charismatic, and freshly graduated from college, with a degree in physical education. On March 23, 1998, the ship had docked at Curaçao, an island nation off the coast of Venezuela. Amy spent the evening dancing at the ship's nightclub with her brother and several members of the ship's band, a group called Blue Orchid. Surveillance footage later showed Amy exiting the club at around 1 a.m., walking towards the elevators. By 5:30 a.m., her father Ron Bradley saw her on their cabin balcony, awake but appearing tired. She was wearing only her underwear and a t-shirt. At 6 a.m., when her parents and brother Brad woke up, Amy was gone. Her shoes were left behind, but her cigarettes and lighter, which she always carried, were missing. The first frantic hours saw her family scouring every deck, lounge, restaurant, and possible hiding spot on the massive vessel. The Bradley family immediately informed the ship's crew, convinced Amy would never leave the vessel on her own. However, Royal Caribbean staff initially suggested she might have gone ashore voluntarily in Curaçao. Given that her purse, wallet, identification, and passport were all left behind in the cabin, this explanation seemed not just unlikely, but impossible. Critical time was lost during those first 4 hours before the ship made a comprehensive announcement and began systematic searches. By then, the Rhapsody of the Seas had already left port and was heading toward its next destination. The window for finding Amy, if she had somehow fallen overboard near Curaçao, had essentially closed. The investigation revealed troubling gaps in the ship's security protocols and raised serious questions about the crew's initial response. Authorities later discovered that several passengers claimed to have seen Amy early that morning between 5:30 and 6 a.m. near an elevator with a member of the ship's band. One witness reported seeing a woman matching Amy's description in the company of someone who appeared to be a crew member, and she looked distressed. Another passenger claimed to have seen Amy on a different deck around the same time. But these sightings were never officially corroborated or thoroughly investigated by ship security. The case took a darker turn when the Bradley family learned more about Amy's interactions with the Blue Orchid band members the night she disappeared. According to witnesses and family accounts, Amy had been dancing and socializing with the band, particularly with the bass player, Alistair Douglas, who went by the nickname Yellow. Several passengers reported that Yellow had been persistent in his attention toward Amy throughout the evening, and some described his behavior as inappropriate or overly aggressive. When investigators attempted to question the band members, they discovered that Yellow had mysteriously disembarked the ship in Curaçao, the same port where Amy disappeared. This timing raised immediate red flags, but by the time authorities realized the significance, Yellow had vanished into the crowd of the busy Caribbean port city. The other band members provided conflicting accounts of the evening's events, and their testimonies contained numerous inconsistencies that were never adequately resolved. Perhaps most disturbing of all were the alleged sightings of Amy that began surfacing in the months and years following her disappearance. Multiple witnesses claimed to have seen a woman matching Amy's description in various locations throughout the Caribbean, often in situations that suggested she was being held against her will. In August 1998, just 5 months after Amy's disappearance, a Canadian tourist named David Carmichael reported encountering a woman on a Curaçao beach who approached him and said, "Please help me. My name is Amy Bradley. I'm not supposed to be here. I was taken from a cruise ship." When Carmichael tried to help her, she was allegedly pulled away by 2 men before he could intervene. Another credible sighting occurred in 1999, when a U.S. Navy sailor named David Metcalf claimed he encountered Amy at a brothel in Curaçao. According to Metcalf's testimony, the woman identified herself as Amy Bradley and begged for his help, saying she had been kidnapped and was being forced into prostitution. Metcalf reported that the woman had the same distinctive tattoos as Amy, including a Tasmanian devil on her shoulder and a gecko on her navel. When Metcalf returned with help, the woman was gone. These sightings led investigators to explore the possibility that Amy had become a victim of human trafficking, a crime that was unfortunately common in certain Caribbean ports during the late 1990s. The theory suggested that Amy may have been targeted, kidnapped from the ship, and forced into the sex trade. This explanation would account for both her disappearance and the subsequent sightings, but it also highlighted the cruise industry's vulnerability to organized crime operating in various ports of call. The Bradley family has never stopped searching for Amy. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars hiring private investigators, posting rewards, and working with various law enforcement agencies across multiple countries. The FBI eventually classified Amy's case as a missing person investigation rather than a presumed drowning, acknowledging the possibility that she may still be alive. In 2005, they increased the reward for information leading to Amy's safe return to $250,000, one of the highest rewards ever offered in a missing person case. Royal Caribbean faced intense scrutiny over their handling of Amy's disappearance. Critics argued that the cruise line prioritized maintaining their schedule over conducting a thorough search, that security cameras malfunctioned or were poorly positioned, and that crew members were not adequately trained to handle such emergencies. The The company eventually settled with the Bradley family out of court for an undisclosed amount, though they maintained they had followed proper protocols. Amy Bradley's case exposed fundamental weaknesses in maritime security and passenger safety protocols that persist to this day. Cruise ships operate in international waters where jurisdictional issues complicate investigations, surveillance systems often have blind spots, and the transient nature of both passengers and crew makes witness testimony unreliable. Most disturbing of all, the case highlighted how quickly someone can vanish in an environment that appears completely controlled and secure. Today, more than 25 years later, Amy Lynn Bradley remains missing. Her family continues to believe she may still be alive, held somewhere against her will. The case has become a catalyst for reforms in cruise ship security. But for the Bradley family, no amount of policy change can fill the void left by their daughter's disappearance. Amy's story serves as a chilling reminder that even in paradise, darkness can strike without warning, and some mysteries may never be solved. Let's move to our second story. The Morgue Nightmare. The case of Robert Jones. Beneath the glamour and luxury of cruise vacations lies an unseen world. A place of harsh realities where the fragility of life is exposed, and the promise of safety sometimes fails. Few stories illustrate this grim underbelly better than the ordeal that befell Robert Jones and his family aboard a Carnival cruise in August 2020, which would eventually lead to a widely publicized lawsuit and prompt renewed scrutiny of maritime protocols for handling passenger deaths. The Jones family had boarded the Carnival Dream with anticipation, ready to celebrate birthdays and reconnect after months of pandemic separation. Cruises, as Robert Jones believed, offered convenience, relaxation, and security. A floating city with everything you might need, including medical staff and contingency plans for emergencies. No one anticipated that things could go catastrophically wrong, or that the ship's interior would harbor secrets too dark to reveal in any vacation brochure. Robert Jones, a healthy and active 78-year-old, began the voyage in high spirits. He was known among friends for his jokes, his exuberant dancing, even as decades with the same wife made him the envy of younger couples on board. But on the second night, tragedy struck. After dinner and family games, Robert reportedly complained of chest pain, and moments later suffered a massive heart attack in his cabin. Within minutes, Carnival's medical staff arrived. Though protocols were followed and attempts made to revive him, Robert passed away. For his daughter, Sarah Jones, and her family, grief was instant and overwhelming. The ship's captain and medical team promised that Robert's body would be stored respectfully until they returned to port, and assured the family that Carnival offered state-of-the-art mortuary procedures for such circumstances. Most cruise ships, in fact, have dedicated morgues, small, refrigerated rooms designed for the unfortunate reality that people do die at sea, and bodies cannot always be offloaded immediately. Regulations require these morgues to function in a secure and hygienic manner, protecting both the dignity of the deceased and the legal interests of the cruise line. Families are typically told that their loved one will be stored away from view in temperature-controlled safety until the vessel docks and arrangements can be made for proper burial or return. But for the Jones family, none of this would prove true. Carnival's staff asked the family directly, did they wish to leave Robert in the onboard morgue, or would they prefer he be transferred to what was described as a secure alternative location within the ship? Specifically, a drinks cooler in a crew area. Distraught and vulnerable, the Joneses relied on assurances that Carnival was following best practices. They agreed, never imagining the consequences. For 6 days, as the ship traveled from port to port, Robert's body remained in the so-called alternative location. The crew stacked beverage crates and supplies all around him, and, according to court documents, the temperature inside the cooler fluctuated between 40 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit, sometimes much warmer than required to prevent rapid decomposition. The cooler itself, far from a morgue, was little more than a windowless closet with a faulty refrigeration system where staff entered repeatedly to restock drinks, never considering the presence, let alone the dignity, of the deceased guest. When the ship finally docked in Galveston, Texas, Carnival's representatives prepared Robert's body for release to a local funeral home. But the Joneses' nightmare was only beginning. Instead of a respectfully handled loved one, the family was met with a decomposed corpse, one that required a closed casket funeral and for which medical examiners could barely conduct a proper post-mortem. Robert's skin had blackened, fluids had pooled, dehydration and swelling were apparent. The room itself, according to accounts, was suffused with the sickly odor of decay and spoiled beverages. Sarah Jones described in interviews how Carnival's staff remained largely silent on the details of where and how her father's body had been held. When pressed, some employees reportedly answered in vague platitudes about unexpected circumstances at sea. But as the family investigated, consulting the funeral home director and ordering toxicology tests, the truth emerged. Robert had not been stored in the ship's morgue at all, but in a multi-purpose drinks cooler, shared at times by staff and left unmonitored for hours at a stretch. The Carnival dream, as it turned out, had only one morgue, and crew had decided it was full when Robert died, though later investigation suggested that several other deceased passengers had, in fact, been placed nearby. The case quickly garnered attention in the media. Family lawyers brought suit against Carnival for $1 million, alleging gross negligence, emotional distress, and violation of maritime laws regarding the treatment of deceased persons. The complaint filed in federal court described Carnival's actions as outrageous, reckless, and in conscious disregard of the dignity of those who entrust their lives to the company's care while at sea. The story was picked up by major news outlets, adding fuel to long-standing debates about cruise industry standards and the rights of passengers in international waters. Carnival's official response was both defensive and remorseful. Spokespersons insisted that staff had chosen the drinks cooler location due to unusual circumstances, and claimed the company had always sought to act respectfully toward the Jones family. In legal filings, Carnival argued that the ship's facilities met international safety standards, and that delays in offloading Robert's body arose from COVID-era port restrictions rather than any deliberate negligence. Privately, however, several crew members described a recurring pattern of informal procedures for handling bodies, stories of multiple deceased guests being stored together, inadequate temperature monitoring, and frequent staff confusion about correct protocols. Former Carnival employees and crew veterans spoke with cruise safety experts, many recounting similar incidents across different ships and cruise lines. While most ships are required to have at least one dedicated morgue, several reported situations in which morgues became overfilled, forcing improvisation in cramped spaces and reliance on ad hoc solutions. Some mentioned that during peak cruise season, unexpected deaths were more common than guests might think, especially on longer transoceanic journeys, which tend to attract older passengers with pre-existing health conditions. The Jones case eventually led to further scrutiny by the United States Department of Transportation and the Coast Guard. Investigators reviewed logs, refrigeration records, and internal emails between crew members. They found that, on several previous voyages, the Carnival Dream had stored bodies in food areas, luggage compartments, and other non-medical locations when the morgue reached capacity. The lack of standardized procedures was highlighted as a major failing, one that placed both the dignity of deceased passengers and the health of living guests at risk. As the Jones lawsuit progressed, stories began surfacing on Reddit and cruise industry forums from passengers and crew alike who had witnessed or even participated in the storage and transportation of bodies on cruise ships. Some described the cold box, a nickname for the crew drinks cooler, as a place of dread and avoidance, where certain stewards refused to enter during late-night hours. Others recalled being asked to help move deceased guests, despite having little or no training in mortuary care. On one occasion, a crew member explained how bodies were wrapped in multiple layers of plastic and loaded onto stretcher carts normally used for linen service. Sarah Jones and her family testified in court about the lasting emotional trauma of discovering her father's remains in such condition, and about the persistent nightmares and anxiety that followed. She told the judge, "We entrusted Carnival with my father's care, and instead, we spent the rest of our vacation haunted by the knowledge that he was being treated like an object, not a person. No family should ever have to endure what we experienced." Cruise industry insiders have since disclosed that the Jones case was far from unique. Although the lawsuit prompted Carnival and other major lines to reevaluate and enhance their procedures, widespread reform was slow. Some ships, especially older vessels, continued to rely on shared refrigeration spaces or makeshift arrangements during emergency situations. Advocacy groups called on the International Maritime Organization to mandate universal standards for the storage and handling of human remains, including minimum temperature controls, secure morgue access, and mandatory crew training in mortuary procedures. As of 2024, Carnival and several other lines have implemented specific reforms, installing larger, dedicated morgues, improving temperature monitoring, and requiring shipboard staff to complete online courses on handling passenger deaths. Yet, cruise safety experts still caution that the industry is inherently reactive rather than proactive, addressing issues only after lawsuits make headlines or regulatory pressure mounts. For the Jones family, change comes too late. Robert's memory endures not as a story of carefree seas and endless celebration, but as a cautionary tale, a reminder to all cruise passengers about the importance of knowing what lies behind the scenes. The family's advocacy continues, aiming to educate others about passenger rights, the reality of mortality at sea, and the need for transparency in how cruise ships handle the ultimate emergencies. The morgue nightmare is more than a story. It is a wake-up call. It exposes the uncomfortable truth about cruise vacations, that behind every cheerful brochure and sparkling deck lies a complex, sometimes inadequate system for dealing with life's darkest moments. It proves, tragically and indelibly, that even the safest seeming places can betray their promise, leaving families to navigate horror and heartbreak in the shadow of luxury. Let's move to our third story, The Bullet That Ricocheted, a crew member's true ordeal. Working on a cruise ship is seen by many as an adventurous career, one of travel, diverse crews, and unforgettable experiences at sea. But beneath the surface of camaraderie and entertainment, crew members sometimes encounter dangers that passengers never glimpse. Some threats, like medical emergencies or fires, are well recognized. Others are shrouded in secrecy, known only to insiders until a chilling incident breaks through the walls of silence. Among these, one of the eeriest and most little-known tales involves a gunshot ricocheting across the navigation bridge, nearly costing a life and revealing the unpredictable hazards of international seafaring. The witness and narrator of this story is a former cruise ship officer who posted anonymously on Reddit, sharing details that later found echoes across industry forums. What started as an ordinary evening on the ship The name and company, withheld for obvious safety reasons, quickly spiraled into an extraordinary crisis, one that the cruise line made every effort to keep from public knowledge. The ship, a large vessel carrying thousands of passengers, was nearing a politically tense port in a region known for occasional unrest. These areas sometimes deploy specialized Coast Guard or military personnel to oversee and protect maritime traffic. Officers such as our narrator are trained for almost every conceivable emergency. But few expect a live gunshot to be fired on board a luxury cruise. It was just after midnight when the ship's navigation bridge, a high-security zone occupied only by senior officers and crew controlling the ship, received its official visit. A team of local authorities, dressed like Coast Guard officials, boarded to conduct what they described as a routine safety inspection. Such checks are not unusual. Ports sometimes send their own teams aboard to verify compliance with local maritime law, security codes, or even to check for contraband. Standard protocol allows these officials access to certain restricted areas, always accompanied by at least 2 ship officers. The inspection began normally. The officers were polite, conducting short interviews and checking paperwork. Then, suddenly, a shot rang out, a deafening crack that echoed off metal and glass. In a moment that lives on in the crew's collective memory, one of the visiting authorities had pulled his sidearm and fired, apparently by accident, toward the reinforced window of the navigation bridge. The bullet, instead of lodging safely in the wall or falling harmlessly to the ground, hit the steel window framing and ricocheted at head height. Within a split second, it struck a young officer, grazing his neck and embedding itself in a control panel. What had moments before been a routine inspection dissolved into chaos. While alarms sounded and first aid rushed to the bridge, the local officials insisted it had been a misfire, an accident caused by an improperly handled firearm. But for the crew, it was no mere accident. Cruise ship navigation bridges are designed with multiple redundancies to prevent mishaps and maintain security, yet none can fully protect against outside events like a gunshot. The young officer fell to the floor, bleeding but alive. A matter of inches prevented a fatal wound. For the next hour, confusion reigned. The ship's captain rushed to the bridge, medical staff pushed past security, and attempts were made to calm the shaken crew. The local authorities insisted on completing their inspection, but the officers demanded their immediate removal. The scene was not witnessed by passengers, who slept unaware. Nor did the cruise line send out any announcement. Behind closed doors, management was forced to act, quickly and quietly. The officer was bandaged by the ship's doctor and kept in isolation. A report would eventually be filed, as required by maritime law, noting an accidental discharge of firearm by visiting port staff and minor injuries to crew. The bullet, later retrieved from the electronics panel, provided physical evidence. But the cruise line urged silence. In the days that followed, crew members were instructed not to discuss the incident with passengers, and even among themselves, details were minimized. Senior managers made calls to the cruise line's headquarters, seeking advice on both medical treatment and legal liability. For the officer involved, trauma lingered long after the physical wounds healed. Reddit posts and blogs would later recall his struggle to sleep, his fear of returning to work on ships docked near certain ports, and his eventual decision to leave seafaring altogether. News of the incident spread among crew networks, prompting heated debates about port safety and crew protections. Some insiders argued that cruise lines should limit official inspections to 1 or 2 officers only, and always ensure that firearms are either checked at the gangway or safety locked before entry. Others wondered if the line should be held responsible for allowing potentially dangerous officials onto shipboard with loaded weapons. Maritime law, especially in international waters, is notoriously complex. When a cruise ship docks at a foreign port, it is subject partly to local jurisdiction, partly to the laws of its own flag state, and partly to international conventions. This creates a patchwork of guidelines, with crews sometimes caught in the crossfire, literally and figuratively, of conflicting policies. In this specific case, the ship's flag state, the country in which it was registered, required that all injuries be reported to both the cruise line and local authorities. But, as the officer discovered, reports can be written to obscure reality. His own official injury report only described minor trauma sustained during official visit, never mentioning the gunshot nor the full context of what had occurred. Reddit threads exploded in response, with former and current crew members sharing similar stories. Accounts of inspections gone wrong, encounters with armed officials, times when ship security failed to intervene or protect staff. Some wrote about near misses with knives during customs checks. One described being locked in an office for hours during a dispute with local port patrol. A singular theme emerged. Cruise ship crews regularly face threats unfamiliar, even unimaginable, to the average passenger. These revelations sparked new discussions in both maritime safety circles and among international watchdog agencies. Advocacy groups demanded that cruise lines implement stricter controls over who boards their vessels and what procedures are in place for inspections, especially regarding armed port officials. They argued for clear protocols, regular firearms inspections, sealed weapons unless absolutely necessary, and mandatory recording of all official visits via security cameras. The cruise industry, for its part, responded with a mixture of denial and reform. Major lines updated safety manuals, retrained staff, and, in some cases, instituted the type of controls demanded by crew advocacy groups. However, significant risks remain. In lower-income ports around the world, local customs and Coast Guard teams may not adhere to uniform standards. Hosts may feel pressure to allow oversight, even when it means accepting unsafe conditions for their own employees. For passengers, stories like these go untold. When ships advertise their latest entertainment offerings or most advanced safety features, they rarely mention the daily realities faced by the crew, the threats, the moments of fear, and the close calls that happen in the unseen corners of these floating cities. Rarely do vacationers know how hard the staff works, not just to serve, but to survive. The officer who suffered the ricocheting bullet eventually left the cruise industry, writing on his retirement that a ship feels like a world unto itself. But nothing at sea is ever truly safe. Every day, every port, brings its own risks. I am grateful to be alive, and I hope my story reminds people that the brave don't just sail the ship. They keep its secrets and endure its dangers. The bullet that ricocheted is a stark reminder. The ocean is a place of beauty, but also one of sudden violence and unpredictability. For crew members across the world's fleets, the risks are real, the trauma is lasting, and the line between safety and disaster can be crossed in a single, shattering instant. Let's move to our fourth story. The strangulation murder, the case of Camilla. Murder on the high seas carries a particular horror that extends far beyond the crime itself. When violence erupts aboard a cruise ship, passengers find themselves trapped in a confined space with a killer, often hundreds of miles from the nearest law enforcement. The isolation, the inability to escape, and the complex web of international maritime law create a perfect storm for both perpetrators and investigators. Among the most chilling cases to emerge from the cruise industry is the murder of a young woman known in court documents as Camilla. a case that exposed not only the brutality of domestic violence at sea, but also the disturbing ease with which killers can evade justice in international waters. Camilla was a vibrant 28-year-old from South America who had boarded a Mediterranean cruise with her boyfriend of 2 years, a man we'll call Marcus. Friends and family described their relationship as tumultuous, passionate but volatile, marked by jealousy and increasingly frequent arguments. Despite red flags, Camilla had hoped the romantic cruise vacation would help them reconnect and resolve their differences. She posted excited photos on social media before departure, wearing a flowing sundress and beaming with anticipation for what she believed would be a transformative week at sea. The couple had booked an interior cabin on Deck 5 of a large cruise vessel carrying over 3,000 passengers. For the first 3 days, other passengers noticed them dining together, attending shows, and appearing to enjoy themselves. But crew members later testified to witnessing heated arguments in corridors, raised voices from their cabin, and at least one incident where Camilla was seen with what appeared to be finger-shaped bruises on her upper arm. On the 4th night of the cruise, as the ship sailed through calm waters between Italian ports, tragedy struck. At approximately 3 a.m., a passenger in an adjacent cabin reported hearing what sounded like furniture being overturned, followed by muffled shouting and then an eerie silence. The passenger, a retired nurse named Patricia, later testified that she considered calling ship security, but ultimately decided against it, assuming it was just another loud argument between the couple. When Camilla failed to appear for breakfast or respond to housekeeping knocks the following morning, crew members used their master key to enter the cabin. What they discovered would haunt everyone involved in the investigation. Camilla's body was found hanging from a makeshift noose fashioned from bed sheets, suspended from a ceiling fixture near the bathroom. The scene appeared, at first glance, to be a tragic suicide. Marcus was discovered sitting on the cabin floor, apparently in shock, claiming he had awakened to find his girlfriend dead. He told investigators that Camilla had been despondent about their relationship and had threatened suicide multiple times during the voyage. He produced her cell phone, showing text messages she had allegedly sent to friends expressing feelings of hopelessness and mentioning thoughts of self-harm. Ship security immediately secured the scene and notified the captain, who in turn contacted both the cruise line's headquarters and maritime authorities. Because the ship was in international waters, jurisdiction fell to the vessel's flag state, Panama, though the investigation would eventually involve multiple countries as evidence mounted that this was no suicide. The ship's doctor, who served as the initial medical examiner, noted several inconsistencies in his preliminary examination. While the cause of death appeared to be asphyxiation, Camilla's neck showed evidence of manual strangulation, bruising patterns consistent with fingers rather than the smooth pressure expected from hanging. Additionally, her fingernails contained skin and blood that did not match her own DNA, and defensive wounds on her hands suggested she had fought her attacker. Most damning of all was the physical evidence in the cabin itself. Crime scene investigators later determined that the ceiling fixture could not have supported Camilla's weight, and the position of the body was inconsistent with someone who had hanged themselves. The bed sheets showed signs of having been tied after death, when the body was already limp, and blood spatter patterns on the walls indicated a violent struggle had taken place. As news of the death spread among passengers, several came forward with disturbing observations about Marcus's behavior. A bartender reported that Marcus had been drinking heavily and making increasingly aggressive comments about women throughout the voyage. A couple from the neighboring cabin testified to hearing Marcus screaming at Camilla on multiple occasions, including phrases like, "I'll kill you before I let you leave me." Most chilling of all, a passenger who had befriended Camilla reported that she had confided her fear of Marcus and had been planning to end their relationship when they returned home. The investigation took a dramatic turn when security footage from the ship's corridors was reviewed. Cameras showed Marcus leaving their cabin at 2:47 a.m. on the night of the murder, carrying what appeared to be bloody towels. He was seen disposing of items in a laundry chute, then returning to the cabin approximately 20 minutes later. When investigators retrieved the disposed items, they found towels soaked with Camilla's blood and Marcus's torn shirt, which showed clear evidence of a struggle. Despite mounting evidence, the complexity of maritime law created significant challenges for prosecutors. The ship was registered in Panama. The crime occurred in international waters. The victim was a citizen of Colombia, and the suspect held dual citizenship in Argentina and Spain. Multiple countries claimed jurisdiction, leading to months of legal wrangling while Marcus remained in custody, but uncharged. During this delay, Marcus's legal team mounted an aggressive defense, arguing that Camilla had indeed committed suicide and that the physical evidence could be explained by Marcus's attempts to save her life. They claimed the blood on the towels came from his efforts to cut her down, and that the defensive wounds were self-inflicted during her final moments. The text messages on Camilla's phone, they argued, clearly demonstrated her suicidal intentions. However, digital forensics experts made a breakthrough discovery that would ultimately seal Marcus's fate. Analysis of Camilla's phone revealed that the suicidal text messages had been sent after the estimated time of death, using location data and timestamp information that proved they were composed and sent by someone else. Additionally, the phone's browser history showed searches for "how to make hanging look like suicide" and "time it takes to die from strangulation," searches that occurred on Marcus's phone, which was linked to the same Wi-Fi network. The case also revealed disturbing inadequacies in cruise ship security protocols. Despite multiple passengers reporting domestic violence incidents, ship security had never intervened or documented the complaints. The crew's training for handling domestic violence situations was minimal, and there were no established procedures for separating couples or providing protection for potential victims. This lack of preparation created an environment where an escalating situation could reach a deadly conclusion without intervention. Former crew members who came forward during the investigation described a culture of willful blindness to passenger conflicts, particularly those involving domestic violence. One security officer testified that staff were often reluctant to intervene in relationship disputes, for fear of disrupting the vacation atmosphere or facing complaints from passengers. This hands-off approach meant that warning signs were ignored until it was too late. Marcus was eventually extradited to Italy, where the ship had been scheduled to dock, and faced trial for first-degree murder. The prosecution painted a picture of a controlling, violent man who killed his girlfriend in a jealous rage when she threatened to leave him. They argued that he then spent nearly an hour staging the scene to look like suicide, using knowledge gained from internet searches to create a convincing, false narrative. The defense maintained that Camilla's death was a tragic suicide, complicated by Marcus's panicked attempts to save her and cover up what he perceived as his failure to prevent her death. They argued that the prosecution's timeline was flawed and that the physical evidence was circumstantial at best. After a 3-week trial, the jury deliberated for only 4 hours before finding Marcus guilty of murder in the first degree. The judge sentenced him to life in prison, noting the premeditated nature of the crime and the defendant's attempts to deceive investigators. In her sentencing statement, the judge commented on the particular cruelty of committing murder in a confined space where the victim had no means of escape or calling for help. Camilla's family established a foundation in her memory dedicated to raising awareness about domestic violence and improving safety protocols on cruise ships. They successfully lobbied for enhanced crew training, mandatory reporting of domestic violence incidents, and the installation of panic buttons in passenger cabins. Their advocacy led to industry-wide reforms that have potentially saved countless lives. The case of Camilla serves as a stark reminder that violence can erupt anywhere, even in the seemingly safe environment of a luxury cruise. It highlights the particular vulnerabilities faced by domestic violence victims when isolated at sea, and the critical importance of recognizing warning signs before they escalate to tragedy. Most importantly, it demonstrates that behind the facade of paradise, the darkest aspects of human nature can emerge, turning a dream vacation into an irreversible nightmare. The strangulation murder remains one of the most disturbing cases in cruise ship crime history. Not just because of the brutality of the act, but because of how easily it could have been prevented with proper intervention and support systems. Let's move to our fifth story. The 7-deck plunge. The Sarah Kirby tragedy. Among the most harrowing aspects of cruise ship disasters are those that involve passengers falling overboard. Incidents that transform a luxury vacation into a desperate race against time, where every minute can mean the difference between life and death. The vast ocean becomes both a witness and an executioner, swallowing victims in its endless depths while families watch helplessly from the deck above. One case that exemplifies the devastating consequences of inadequate safety protocols and delayed response times is the tragedy of Sarah Kirby aboard the Carnival Destiny. A case that would expose shocking negligence and ultimately result in one of the largest maritime injury settlements in cruise industry history. Sarah Kirby was a 42-year-old marketing executive from Ohio who had boarded the Carnival Destiny with her husband Mark for what was supposed to be a relaxing Caribbean cruise in February 2013. Sarah was known among friends and family as vivacious, adventurous, and someone who embraced life fully. She had been looking forward to this vacation for months, having worked grueling hours on a major corporate merger that had consumed most of her previous year. The cruise represented not just relaxation, but a chance to reconnect with her husband and celebrate their 15th wedding anniversary. The couple had splurged on a balcony cabin on Deck 11, enjoying the ocean views and private outdoor space that made their stateroom feel like a luxurious retreat. For the first 4 days of the voyage, everything proceeded perfectly. Sarah and Mark attended shows, enjoyed elaborate dinners, and spent hours on their balcony watching the endless Caribbean waters. Other passengers who met them described the couple as happy and deeply in love, often seen holding hands as they walked the ship's promenades or laughing together at the poolside bars. On the 5th night of the cruise, as the ship sailed through relatively calm waters between Jamaica and Grand Cayman, the couple attended the ship's formal dining experience, followed by a comedy show in the main theater. Witnesses later testified that both Sarah and Mark had been drinking throughout the evening, not excessively, but enough to be noticeably relaxed and jovial. After the show, they returned to their cabin around 11:30 p.m., planning to enjoy a nightcap on their private balcony while watching the stars. What happened next would be reconstructed through witness testimony, security footage, and Mark's own traumatized account. The couple had been sitting on their balcony furniture, sharing a bottle of wine they had purchased from room service, when Sarah stood up to get a better view of what she thought might be dolphins in the distance. The balcony railing on their deck measured 42 inches high, technically meeting international safety standards but lower than railings found on most modern cruise ships built after 2010. According to Mark's testimony, Sarah was leaning against the railing, pointing excitedly at something in the water, when she suddenly lost her balance. Whether due to the alcohol in her system, a momentary dizzy spell, or simply a tragic miscalculation of her center of gravity, Sarah tumbled forward and over the railing. Mark described the horrible realization that his wife was falling, his desperate lunge to grab her, and the sickening sound of her body hitting the ocean 7 decks below. Mark immediately began screaming for help while frantically searching for the emergency phone in their cabin. His cries alerted passengers in neighboring rooms, who quickly called ship security. Within minutes, crew members arrived at the cabin to find Mark in a state of complete hysteria, repeatedly screaming that his wife had fallen overboard. The time, according to ship logs, was 12:47 a.m. when the first emergency call was received by the bridge. What followed would become the most damaging aspect of the subsequent lawsuit. Despite Mark's immediate report and the clear urgency of the situation, the Carnival Destiny did not execute an emergency stop or begin turning around for nearly 90 minutes. Maritime safety experts later testified that in man-overboard situations, every minute drastically reduces the chances of survival. In the first 15 minutes, rescue chances remain relatively high if the victim is conscious and wearing a life jacket. After 30 minutes in Caribbean waters, hypothermia becomes a significant factor. After 60 minutes, survival chances drop to less than 20%. The delay occurred due to what investigators later determined was a catastrophic breakdown in emergency procedures. The night duty officer who received the initial report apparently doubted the severity of the situation, believing it might be a false alarm or domestic dispute rather than an actual overboard incident. Rather than immediately notifying the bridge and initiating emergency protocols, he spent precious time interviewing Mark and attempting to verify the report through security footage review. When the ship's captain was finally notified at 1:15 a.m., he ordered an immediate emergency turn and dispatched the ship's rescue boats. Coast Guard vessels from Jamaica were contacted, and a coordinated search effort began involving multiple ships and aircraft. But by then, Sarah had been in the water for nearly 90 minutes in darkness, with water temperatures around 78 degrees Fahrenheit and moderate seas that made spotting a person virtually impossible. The search continued for 14 hours, covering over 200 square miles of ocean. Coast Guard helicopters used thermal imaging equipment, multiple ships combed the area in grid patterns, and the Carnival Destiny itself remained in the search zone rather than continuing to its next scheduled port. But despite the massive effort, no trace of Sarah was found. Not her body, not any clothing or personal effects, nothing to indicate she had survived the initial impact or managed to stay afloat during those critical first minutes. The investigation that followed revealed shocking inadequacies in Carnival's emergency response procedures. Internal company emails obtained during the lawsuit discovery process showed that crew training for man-overboard incidents was minimal, with many officers unsure of proper protocols. The delay in response was attributed not to a single individual's error, but to systemic failures in communication, training, and emergency preparedness. Perhaps most disturbing was the revelation that the Carnival Destiny had experienced 3 previous man-overboard incidents in the 2 years prior to Sarah's death, all with similar delayed response times. In each case, the victims were never recovered, and in each case, Carnival had promised internal reviews and improved procedures that were apparently never implemented. Safety experts testified that the cruise line had shown a pattern of prioritizing schedule maintenance and passenger comfort over emergency preparedness. The lawsuit filed by Mark Kirby against Carnival Corporation sought $10 million in damages, alleging negligence, inadequate safety measures, and failure to properly respond to the emergency. The complaint detailed how Sarah's life might have been saved with immediate action, proper equipment deployment, and adequately trained crew members. Maritime law experts noted that the case represented one of the clearest examples of cruise line negligence in recent history. During depositions, former Carnival crew members came forward with damaging testimony about the company's safety culture. One former officer described being discouraged from reporting safety concerns that might delay departures or require expensive modifications. Another testified to inadequate life-saving equipment and poorly maintained rescue boats that were rarely tested or serviced. Most shocking was testimony from a former bridge officer who claimed that man-overboard emergencies were sometimes treated as insurance problems, rather than life-threatening situations requiring immediate action. The case also highlighted broader industry problems with balcony safety. Sarah's fall occurred from a railing that met international standards established in the 1990s. But safety advocates argued that these standards were outdated and insufficient for modern cruise ships carrying thousands of passengers. Statistics showed that balcony falls accounted for nearly 30% of all cruise ship fatalities, with alcohol involvement being a factor in over 60% of cases. Carnival initially contested the lawsuit aggressively, arguing that Sarah's death was a tragic accident caused by her own intoxication and reckless behavior. Company lawyers claimed that no amount of faster response could have saved her, given the height of the fall and the darkness of the ocean. They also argued that the balcony railing met all applicable safety standards and that passengers were responsible for their own safety when consuming alcohol. However, as the evidence mounted and public attention intensified, Carnival's position became increasingly untenable. Maritime safety experts testified convincingly that Sarah could have survived the initial fall and might have been rescued with proper emergency response. The 90-minute delay was deemed inexcusable by multiple expert witnesses, and the pattern of previous incidents suggested a systemic disregard for passenger safety. In March 2016, just days before the case was scheduled to go to trial, Carnival agreed to settle for an undisclosed amount reported by legal sources to be in excess of $8 million. The settlement agreement included provisions for enhanced safety training, improved emergency response procedures, and regular third-party audits of safety protocols. Carnival also agreed to install higher balcony railings on all ships in their fleet within 2 years. Mark Kirby used part of the settlement to establish the Sarah Kirby Maritime Safety Foundation, dedicated to improving cruise ship safety standards and supporting families affected by maritime accidents. The foundation has successfully lobbied for enhanced balcony safety requirements, mandatory crew training certifications, and improved emergency response protocols across the industry. The 7-deck plunge remains a watershed moment in cruise ship safety, exposing how corporate negligence can transform a preventable accident into a fatal tragedy. Sarah Kirby's death serves as a permanent reminder that behind the glossy marketing and luxury amenities, cruise ships operate as complex vessels where safety procedures can mean the difference between life and death. Her story continues to save lives through the reforms it prompted, ensuring that other families might be spared the devastating loss that forever changed Mark Kirby's world. Let's move to our 6th story. The Haunted Queen Mary, Paranormal Terror at Sea. Among the most chilling aspects of cruise ship horror stories are those that transcend the physical realm, entering territory where rational explanation fails and the supernatural takes hold. While most maritime disasters involve tangible threats, mechanical failures, human error, or violent crime, some incidents defy conventional understanding, leaving witnesses questioning the very nature of reality itself. No vessel embodies this eerie phenomenon more than the Queen Mary, a legendary ocean liner turned hotel ship permanently docked in Long Beach, California, where decades of documented paranormal activity have created one of the most haunted locations on Earth. The Queen Mary's dark history began long before her conversion to a tourist attraction. Originally launched in 1936 as a luxury passenger liner, she served with distinction during World War II as a troop ship, carrying over 765,000 military personnel across dangerous wartime seas. But her service came at a terrible cost. Dozens of deaths occurred aboard the vessel during her operational years, from natural causes, accidents, and wartime incidents that would forever imprint themselves upon the ship's very structure. During her military service, the Queen Mary was painted gray and nicknamed the Gray Ghost for her ability to outrun enemy submarines. However, tragedy struck in October 1942 when the ship accidentally collided with her escort vessel, HMS Curacoa, slicing the smaller warship in half and killing 239 crew members. The Queen Mary, under strict wartime orders, could not stop to rescue survivors, leaving the dead to sink into the cold Atlantic waters. Maritime historians believe this traumatic incident marked the beginning of the ship's supernatural reputation, as if the souls of those lost at sea somehow attached themselves to the vessel that survived. After the war, the Queen Mary returned to civilian service, but continued to experience unexplained incidents. Crew members reported strange sounds in empty corridors, doors that opened and closed on their own, and the persistent feeling of being watched during night shifts. Most disturbing were reports of apparitions, translucent figures in military uniforms wandering the decks, particularly in areas that had housed wounded soldiers during wartime transport missions. When the Queen Mary was permanently docked in Long Beach in 1967 and converted into a hotel and museum, the paranormal activity intensified rather than diminished. Staff and guests began reporting increasingly frequent and dramatic supernatural encounters that would eventually make the ship one of the most investigated paranormal locations in the world. What sets the Queen Mary apart from other allegedly haunted locations is the sheer volume of documented incidents and the credibility of many witnesses, including skeptical investigators, maritime experts, and even law enforcement officers. Room B340 became the epicenter of the ship's most terrifying paranormal activity. Originally a first-class stateroom, B340 was eventually removed from guest booking after a series of incidents that left visitors traumatized and the ship's management facing potential liability issues. Guests reported being awakened by invisible hands touching them, faucets turning on and off repeatedly throughout the night, and the overwhelming sensation of malevolent presence in the room. Most disturbing were reports of guests being physically attacked by unseen entities, scratches appearing on their bodies, bed sheets being violently pulled away, and in one documented case, a guest being allegedly pushed down in the bathroom by an invisible force. The room's dark history includes at least 3 confirmed deaths during the ship's operational years, including a passenger who died under mysterious circumstances in 1948 and a crew member who was found dead in the adjoining crew quarters in 1967. Paranormal investigators who have spent nights in B340 report extreme temperature fluctuations, electromagnetic field spikes, and electronic equipment malfunctioning without explanation. Even hardened skeptics have emerged from the room visibly shaken, describing experiences that challenge their fundamental beliefs about the nature of reality. Beyond B340, paranormal activity permeates virtually every deck and section of the Queen Mary. The ship's engine room, where several workers died in accidents during her operational years, is considered one of the most actively haunted areas. Maintenance workers report tools moving on their own, machinery starting without human intervention, and the persistent sound of footsteps on metal grating when no one else is present. Security guards conducting night rounds regularly encounter the apparition of a bearded man in work clothes who appears near the watertight door where a crew member was crushed to death during a routine drill in the 1960s. The ship's first-class pool area, now permanently drained and closed to the public, has generated some of the most compelling paranormal evidence. Multiple witnesses have reported seeing the ghosts of women in 1930s swimwear walking around the empty pool deck, and security cameras have captured unexplained figures moving through the area during hours when the ship is closed to tourists. Most chilling are reports of children's voices echoing from the empty pool, believed to be the spirits of young passengers who drowned in the ship's pools during her operational years. Perhaps the most documented and witnessed paranormal phenomenon aboard the Queen Mary involves the ghost of a young girl known as Jackie. Passengers and crew have reported encounters with this child spirit throughout the ship's public areas, particularly near the former nursery and children's playroom. Jackie is described as appearing in a blue dress with long dark hair and exhibiting playful behavior that can quickly turn frightening. Witnesses report her tugging on clothing, hiding personal belongings, and on several occasions, leading adults to dangerous areas of the ship before vanishing without explanation. The ship's Mayfair bar has become notorious for poltergeist activity that has been witnessed by hundreds of guests and documented by paranormal investigators. Glasses move across tables without being touched. Bottles fall from secured shelves, and the antique cash register operates on its own, sometimes ringing up sales in the middle of the night when the bar is completely empty. Bartenders and staff report the persistent feeling of being watched and have described encounters with the apparition of a well-dressed man who appears to be from the 1940s era, sitting alone at the bar before fading away when approached. Carnival Cruise Lines briefly operated guest accommodations aboard the Queen Mary in the 1980s. But the program was discontinued partly due to the extraordinary number of guest complaints about paranormal encounters. During this period, the ship's guest relations department received dozens of formal complaints about supernatural incidents ranging from unexplained noises to alleged physical contact with invisible entities. Many guests demanded room changes or full refunds, with some threatening legal action over what they described as traumatic supernatural encounters that ruined their vacations. The Queen Mary's reputation attracted the attention of serious paranormal researchers, including teams from the Atlantic Paranormal Society, TAPS, featured on the television program Ghost Hunters, and renowned investigators like Peter James and Richard Sennett. These investigations have produced compelling evidence, including electronic voice phenomena, EVP, recordings, thermal imaging anomalies, and electromagnetic field readings that suggest genuine paranormal activity rather than simple tourist attraction theatrics. One of the most significant investigations occurred in 2005, when a team of scientists and paranormal researchers conducted a week-long study using advanced monitoring equipment throughout the ship. Their findings included temperature drops of up to 20 degrees in specific locations, electromagnetic signatures consistent with reported apparition sightings, and audio recordings of unexplained voices speaking in multiple languages. Most compelling was video footage captured in the ship's grand ballroom, showing what appears to be a translucent figure dancing alone in the center of the room during the early morning hours. Former Queen Mary security chief, Jim Beam, who worked aboard the ship for over 15 years, documented hundreds of paranormal incidents in official security reports. His logs include detailed accounts of surveillance equipment detecting motion in empty areas, security alarms triggering without apparent cause, and multiple sightings of apparitions by security personnel during routine patrols. Beam, initially a skeptic, became convinced of the ship's supernatural activity after personally witnessing apparitions on multiple occasions and experiencing unexplained phenomena that defied rational explanation. The ship's dark reputation extends beyond individual ghost sightings to more complex paranormal phenomena. Psychic investigators report that certain areas of the Queen Mary seem to exist in a state of temporal distortion, where past and present blur together. Guests have reported encountering passengers and crew members dressed in period clothing who interact normally before suddenly vanishing, leaving witnesses questioning whether they experienced time slips or encountered elaborate historical reenactors. Maritime historians and paranormal experts theorize that the Queen Mary's supernatural activity results from the intense emotional trauma experienced aboard the vessel during her operational years. The combination of wartime deaths, tragic accidents, and the profound human experiences of hope, fear, and loss that occurred during thousands of ocean crossings may have created what researchers term a psychic imprint, residual energy that continues to manifest decades after the original events. Today, the Queen Mary offers official paranormal tours and overnight ghost hunting experiences, allowing visitors to explore the ship's most haunted areas under controlled conditions. These programs have generated thousands of additional paranormal reports and continue to attract investigators from around the world. However, many staff members privately admit that the organized tours only scratch the surface of the ship's supernatural activity, with the most intense phenomena occurring in restricted areas closed to public access. The haunted Queen Mary represents more than just ghost stories. It serves as a floating monument to the countless souls who lived, died, and experienced profound human emotions within her steel walls, whether one believes in the supernatural or not. The sheer volume and consistency of paranormal reports spanning over 5 decades suggests that some mysteries transcend conventional understanding, leaving us to wonder what really lies beyond the veil between life and death in the endless expanse of the sea. Let's move to our 7th story. The Man Overboard Refugees, a midnight cover-up. Some of the most disturbing cruise ship incidents are those that passengers never see. Events that occur in the shadows, carefully concealed from vacationing families who believe they're sailing on nothing more than a floating resort. These hidden realities involve desperate human trafficking, political asylum seekers, and the dark underbelly of international maritime law that allows certain activities to flourish in the anonymity of international waters. One particularly chilling account emerged from a Reddit post by a former cruise ship crew member, describing a night that forever changed his understanding of what really happens aboard these vessels when passengers are safely tucked away in their cabins. The crew member, posting anonymously for obvious legal and safety reasons, described working aboard a large cruise ship operating in the Caribbean during the height of the Central American refugee crisis in 2018. The vessel, which he identified only as a major cruise line operating out of Florida, regularly sailed routes that took it near politically unstable regions where desperate people often attempted dangerous ocean crossings in makeshift boats, seeking asylum in the United States or other safe harbors. It was during the ship's 3rd night at sea, approximately 200 miles northeast of the Dominican Republic, when the incident occurred. The crew member was working a late shift in one of the ship's crew-only areas when the ship's general alarm system activated. Not the passenger emergency signal, but the internal crew alert that indicated a serious situation requiring immediate response from all available personnel. The time was approximately 2:30 a.m., when most of the ship's 4,000 passengers were asleep in their cabins. Over the ship's internal communication system, officers announced Code Oscar, maritime terminology for man overboard, followed by coordinates and instructions for immediate emergency response. All available crew members were directed to muster stations, and the ship began an emergency turn that would have been noticeable to any passengers who happened to be awake. The crew member described the controlled chaos that followed. Lifeboats being prepared, searchlights sweeping the dark ocean, and the palpable tension among officers who seemed unusually secretive about the nature of the emergency. What the crew member witnessed next would haunt him for years. Instead of a single person in the water, the ship's rescue boats returned with nearly 24 individuals, men, women, and children of various ages, all appearing to be of Central American origin. They were soaking wet, hypothermic, and in various states of distress, clearly having spent considerable time in the ocean. Most disturbing was the condition of their small boat, which rescue crews had also retrieved, a barely seaworthy vessel constructed from scrap wood and metal, with no proper safety equipment and barely enough space for the number of people it had carried. The refugees were immediately taken to a restricted area of the ship that most crew members had never seen, a section of the crew quarters that had been hastily converted into temporary housing. The crew member described being assigned to help distribute dry clothing and basic medical supplies, which gave him access to the area and allowed him to witness the refugees' condition firsthand. Many showed signs of dehydration and exposure. Several children appeared malnourished, and at least 2 individuals required immediate medical attention for injuries sustained during their time at sea. What made this incident particularly disturbing was the cruise line's apparent preparedness for such situations. The temporary housing area was equipped with basic bedding, medical supplies, and food specifically designed for emergency refugee situations. Staff members seemed to follow established protocols, suggesting this was not the first time the ship had encountered asylum seekers in distress. The crew member realized he was witnessing a carefully orchestrated operation designed to handle human trafficking victims and refugees, while maintaining complete secrecy from paying passengers. Throughout the night, passengers remained completely unaware of the situation unfolding just decks below their luxury accommodations. The ship's entertainment staff received instructions to be prepared with explanations for any passengers who might inquire about the emergency turn or unusual activity. They were told to describe it as a minor mechanical issue that had been quickly resolved. Security personnel were positioned at key access points to ensure no passengers could wander into restricted areas where they might encounter the refugees. The crew member described overhearing conversations between ship officers and what appeared to be representatives from various government agencies, conducted via encrypted satellite communications. These discussions involved complex negotiations about the refugees' legal status, potential asylum claims, and arrangements for their eventual transfer to appropriate authorities. The conversation suggested that such incidents occurred regularly enough that established protocols existed for handling them, including specific procedures for different nationalities and legal circumstances. Most chilling was the discovery that several of the refugees were unaccompanied minors, children between the ages of 8 and 16, who had attempted the dangerous ocean crossing without adult supervision. These children told crew members, through interpreters, that they were fleeing violence in their home countries and had paid human traffickers substantial sums to arrange their passage to the United States. Many had been at sea for over 48 hours in their inadequate vessel before being spotted by the cruise ship's lookouts. The refugees remained aboard the ship for 3 days, during which time passengers continued their vacation activities, completely unaware of the humanitarian crisis unfolding in the restricted sections below. The crew member described the surreal experience of serving poolside cocktails to vacationing families, while knowing that desperate asylum seekers were being held in cramped quarters just a few decks away. The psychological toll on crew members who were aware of the situation was significant, with many struggling to maintain their cheerful service demeanor while processing the stark contrast between passenger luxury and refugee desperation. On the 3rd night, under cover of darkness, the refugees were transferred to what the crew member believed were Coast Guard vessels. Though the ships bore no clear identification and the transfer occurred far from any port, the operation was conducted with military precision, using the ship's tender boats to ferry small groups of refugees to the waiting vessels. The entire transfer took less than 2 hours, and by morning, all evidence of the refugees' presence had been eliminated from the ship. The crew member described being required to sign additional confidentiality agreements specifically related to the incident, with severe penalties threatened for anyone who disclosed information about the refugees or the ship's handling of the situation. Management emphasized that discussing the incident with passengers, media, or even family members could result in immediate termination and potential legal action. These agreements extended beyond the crew member's employment with the cruise line, creating a permanent gag order about the events he had witnessed. In subsequent conversations with other crew members, the Reddit poster learned that such incidents occurred regularly throughout the cruise industry, particularly on routes near politically unstable regions or major human trafficking corridors. Experienced crew members described a well-established system for handling refugees, asylum seekers, and trafficking victims, complete with specialized training for certain personnel and established relationships with various government agencies and international organizations. The cruise industry's involvement in these situations highlights the complex legal and ethical challenges that arise when commercial vessels encounter humanitarian crises in international waters. Ships are legally obligated to render assistance to people in distress at sea. But the presence of refugees aboard passenger vessels creates significant complications for cruise lines, passengers, and the refugees themselves. The need for secrecy stems partly from legitimate security concerns, but also from commercial interests in maintaining the illusion of carefree vacation experiences. Maritime law experts note that cruise ships operating in refugee corridors face impossible choices between humanitarian obligations and commercial interests. While international law requires ships to rescue people in distress, the cruise industry's business model depends on maintaining passenger satisfaction and avoiding situations that might disrupt vacation experiences. This creates perverse incentives for cruise lines to handle refugee situations as quietly as possible, often at the expense of transparency and proper humanitarian protocols. The crew member's account raises disturbing questions about the cruise industry's role in the broader refugee crisis and human trafficking networks. The apparent routine nature of these incidents suggests that cruise ships may be encountering asylum seekers far more frequently than the public realizes, and that established protocols exist for handling such situations without public knowledge or proper oversight from humanitarian organizations. Perhaps most troubling is the realization that thousands of cruise passengers remain completely unaware of the human suffering that sometimes occurs just meters away from their vacation activities. The stark contrast between passenger luxury and refugee desperation highlights the moral complexities of modern maritime commerce, where humanitarian crises and leisure tourism intersect in ways that challenge our understanding of corporate responsibility and human compassion. The man overboard refugee's story serves as a sobering reminder that the ocean conceals more than just its physical depths. It hides human stories of desperation, survival, and institutional indifference that continue to unfold beyond the view of those who sail its surface in search of paradise. For the crew member who witnessed these events, the knowledge that such suffering exists alongside vacation luxury created a permanent shift in perspective, transforming his understanding of the cruise industry from provider of dreams to participant in one of humanity's most pressing moral challenges. Let's move to our 8th story: the Scandinavian Star Fire, a maritime inferno. Fire aboard a ship represents one of the most terrifying scenarios imaginable. Passengers trapped in a steel vessel surrounded by water, with nowhere to run and limited means of escape. Unlike fires on land, where people can evacuate to safety, shipboard fires create a unique horror where survival depends entirely on crew competence, proper safety equipment, and emergency procedures that must work flawlessly under extreme pressure. Among the most devastating examples of maritime fire disasters is the tragedy of the MS Scandinavian Star, an incident that exposed catastrophic safety failures and left 159 people dead in what became one of the worst peacetime maritime disasters in Scandinavian history. The MS Scandinavian Star was a passenger ferry operating between Denmark and Norway, carrying both passengers and vehicles across the Skagerrak Strait. Built in 1971, the ship had changed hands multiple times and undergone various modifications that would later prove fatal. In April 1990, the vessel was operating under a complex ownership structure that created dangerous gaps in safety oversight, crew training, and emergency preparedness. A perfect storm of negligence that would soon claim dozens of innocent lives. On the evening of April 6, 1990, the Scandinavian Star departed Oslo, Norway, bound for Frederikshavn, Denmark, carrying 383 passengers and 99 crew members. The passenger manifest included families with children, elderly travelers, and tourists looking forward to what should have been a routine overnight ferry crossing. Most passengers planned to sleep during the journey, booking small cabins or settling into reclining chairs in the ship's lounges, unaware that they were aboard a vessel with inadequate safety systems and a crew largely unprepared for emergency situations. The first signs of trouble emerged around 2 a.m. on April 7th, when smoke was detected in one of the ship's corridors on Deck 3. The initial fire appeared to start in a cabin area, though the exact cause would later become a subject of intense investigation and controversy. What began as a seemingly manageable incident quickly spiraled into catastrophe due to a series of failures that would haunt maritime safety experts for decades. The ship's fire detection system, which should have provided early warning and precise location information, malfunctioned at the critical moment. Instead of triggering immediate alarms throughout the vessel, the system provided contradictory signals that confused crew members about the fire's location and severity. This initial confusion cost precious minutes, during which the fire spread rapidly through corridors and ventilation systems that lacked proper fire-resistant barriers. Perhaps most damaging was the crew's inadequate training and preparation for fire emergencies. Many crew members had been hired just days before the voyage and had received minimal safety training. When the fire alarm finally sounded, crew members struggled to locate firefighting equipment, operate safety systems, and coordinate evacuation procedures. Language barriers among the international crew created additional confusion, with critical safety communications being misunderstood or lost entirely during the most crucial moments. The ship's fire suppression systems proved woefully inadequate for the rapidly spreading blaze. Fire doors that should have contained the flames failed to close properly, allowing smoke and fire to spread through passenger corridors and stairwells. The ventilation system, rather than being shut down to prevent fire spread, continued operating and actually helped distribute toxic smoke throughout the ship's interior spaces where passengers were sleeping. As the fire spread, passengers began awakening to smoke-filled corridors and the smell of burning materials. Many found their escape routes blocked by flames or thick toxic smoke that made navigation impossible. The ship's emergency lighting system failed in several areas, leaving passengers stumbling through dark, smoke-filled passages in search of exits they couldn't find. Emergency announcements were delayed and, when they finally came, were often inaudible due to smoke damage to the ship's communication systems. Passenger accounts from survivors painted a picture of absolute terror and confusion. Families became separated in the chaos, with parents losing track of children and elderly passengers unable to move quickly enough to escape the advancing flames. Many passengers described being trapped in their cabins as corridors filled with smoke, forcing them to choose between staying in relative safety or venturing into passages where visibility was zero, and toxic fumes threatened immediate unconsciousness. The ship's evacuation procedures collapsed under the pressure of the emergency. Lifeboats that should have provided safe escape routes were either inaccessible due to fire damage or operated by crew members who lacked proper training. Several lifeboats were launched prematurely or incorrectly, leaving passengers stranded as the boats capsized or drifted away from the burning vessel. Life jackets were stored in locations that became inaccessible due to fire and smoke, leaving many passengers without basic flotation devices. Captain Hugo Larsen faced an impossible situation as his ship became engulfed in flames while still several hours from port. The decision to continue toward Lysekil, Sweden, rather than immediately heading for the nearest land, would later be heavily criticized as contributing to the death toll. During the hours-long journey to port, the fire continued spreading, and passengers continued dying from smoke inhalation and burns while rescue vessels struggled to reach the ship in rough seas. The response from nearby vessels and coastal authorities highlighted additional failures in maritime emergency coordination. Communication. Problems between the Scandinavian Star and rescue services led to delays in deploying proper firefighting equipment and medical personnel. When rescue ships finally reached the ferry, they found a vessel so engulfed in flames that approaching safely became nearly impossible, forcing rescuers to risk their own lives attempting to evacuate survivors. The human toll was catastrophic. Of the 159 people who died, most succumbed to smoke inhalation rather than burns, trapped in their cabins or corridors as toxic gases filled the ship's interior. Entire families perished together, unable to escape the maze of smoke-filled passages. The victims included children as young as 2 years old and elderly passengers who simply couldn't move quickly enough to escape the advancing flames. Many bodies were found in groups, suggesting that passengers had attempted to help each other, but were overcome by smoke before reaching safety. Investigation into the disaster revealed a shocking pattern of negligence and regulatory failures that extended far beyond the immediate cause of the fire. The ship's safety certificates were found to be inadequate or fraudulent, with modifications made to the vessel that compromised fire safety without proper oversight. The crew hiring practices prioritized cost savings over safety qualifications, resulting in a team that was fundamentally unprepared for emergency situations. Most disturbing was evidence suggesting that the fire may not have been accidental. Investigators found indications of multiple ignition points and accelerants that suggested possible arson, leading to theories about insurance fraud or deliberate sabotage. However, the investigation was hampered by the extensive fire damage and conflicts between multiple national jurisdictions, preventing definitive conclusions about the fire's origins. The Scandinavian Star disaster led to major reforms in maritime safety regulations, particularly regarding fire safety systems, crew training requirements, and emergency procedures. New international standards were implemented for fire-resistant materials, evacuation procedures, and crew certification. However, maritime safety experts note that many of these reforms came too late for the 159 people who died due to preventable failures in basic safety systems. Survivors of the disaster faced years of physical and psychological trauma, with many suffering from severe burns, smoke inhalation injuries, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Families of victims fought legal battles for decades, seeking compensation and accountability from the various companies and regulatory agencies whose failures contributed to the tragedy. The complex ownership structure of the vessel made determining responsibility extremely difficult, with blame spread across multiple entities and jurisdictions. The case highlighted fundamental problems with maritime safety oversight, particularly for vessels operating under flags of convenience that allowed ship owners to avoid strict safety regulations. The Scandinavian Star was registered in the Bahamas while operating in European waters, creating regulatory gaps that permitted dangerous cost-cutting measures and inadequate safety standards. Today, the Scandinavian Star disaster serves as a case study in maritime safety courses worldwide, illustrating how multiple system failures can combine to create catastrophic results. The tragedy demonstrated that passenger safety depends not just on modern equipment, but on proper training, maintenance, oversight, and the moral commitment of operators to prioritize human life over profit margins. The fire aboard the Scandinavian Star remains one of the most preventable disasters in maritime history. A tragedy that occurred not because of unforeseeable circumstances, but because of human negligence, regulatory failures, and corporate indifference to passenger safety. The 159 people who died deserved better protection from an industry that promised safe passage, but delivered a floating death trap. Their memory serves as a permanent reminder that the ocean's greatest dangers sometimes come not from the sea itself, but from the vessels we trust to carry us safely across its waters. Let's move to our 9th story. The Carnival Magic Haunting. Deck 7's supernatural terror. Among the most unsettling aspects of cruise ship horror stories are those that cannot be explained by mechanical failure, human error, or criminal activity. Incidents that venture into the realm of the supernatural, where rational explanation fails and passengers find themselves confronting forces beyond comprehension. While skeptics dismiss such accounts as imagination or coincidence, the sheer volume and consistency of paranormal reports from certain cruise ships suggests that some vessels may harbor energies or presences that defy conventional understanding. The Carnival Magic, launched in 2011, has become notorious among cruise passengers and crew for persistent supernatural activity, particularly on Deck 7, where guests regularly report encounters that transform their dream vacation into a terrifying nightmare. The Carnival Magic's reputation for paranormal activity began almost immediately after her maiden voyage, with guests and crew reporting unusual phenomena that seem to intensify rather than diminish over time. Unlike the Queen Mary, whose haunted reputation stems from decades of historical tragedy, the Carnival Magic's supernatural activity appeared almost spontaneously, as if the ship itself had somehow attracted or awakened otherworldly presences. The incidents were not isolated to a single area, but seemed concentrated on Deck 7, specifically in the corridor of cabins between 7215 and 7250, where multiple guests reported experiences that left them psychologically traumatized and desperate to change accommodations. John Heald, Carnival's senior cruise director and brand ambassador, became an inadvertent chronicler of the ship's paranormal activity through his popular blog and social media presence. Heald, known for his humor and diplomatic handling of guest complaints, found himself repeatedly fielding reports from Carnival Magic passengers describing supernatural encounters that were far beyond typical cruise ship grievances. What made these reports particularly credible was their consistency. Multiple guests, traveling independently and unaware of previous incidents, described remarkably similar phenomena in the same areas of the ship. The most frequently reported incident involved cabin lights flickering in patterns that seemed deliberately controlled rather than random electrical malfunctions. Guests described lights turning on and off in sequences that resembled Morse code or some form of communication attempt. Electrical engineers who examined the ship's systems found no explanation for these occurrences, with the ship's electrical grid functioning normally in all other areas. Most unsettling were reports of the flickering occurring in response to guests' verbal questions, as if an invisible presence was attempting to communicate through the ship's electrical systems. Perhaps the most terrifying reports centered around phantom phone calls that plagued guests on Deck 7. Passengers described being awakened in the middle of the night by their cabin telephone ringing, only to answer and hear either complete silence, static-filled breathing, or what sounded like distant voices speaking in languages they couldn't identify. When guests contacted the ship's communication center to report these calls, technical staff found no record of calls being placed to their rooms. The phone system showed no malfunctions, yet the calls continued throughout multiple voyages, always affecting the same range of cabins on Deck 7. One particularly disturbing case involved a family from Texas who booked cabin 7229 for a 7-day Caribbean cruise in March 2013. The family, parents, and 2 teenage children, reported that beginning on their second night, they experienced a series of escalating supernatural incidents that ultimately forced them to abandon their cabin. It started with the bathroom faucets turning on by themselves during the night, progressing to cabinet doors opening and closing repeatedly, and culminating in what the mother described as invisible hands touching family members while they slept. The teenage daughter reported waking to find her hair being gently stroked by something she couldn't see, while the father claimed to have been physically pushed while standing on their balcony. The family's ordeal reached a climax on their 4th night when they reported seeing a translucent figure standing at the foot of their bed. Described as a middle-aged man in what appeared to be cruise ship officer's uniform from an earlier era. The figure allegedly remained visible for several minutes, making eye contact with family members before slowly fading away. The family immediately contacted guest services, demanding an explanation and requesting immediate relocation to a different cabin. John Heald later confirmed that the family was moved to Deck 9 and experienced no further incidents for the remainder of their cruise. What made this case particularly significant was the family's background. The father was a retired police detective and the mother was a nurse, both trained observers who approached the situation with initial skepticism. Their detailed written account, submitted to Carnival's customer service department, provided one of the most comprehensive documentation of supernatural activity aboard the Magic. The family's report included specific times, detailed descriptions of phenomena, and their attempts to find rational explanations before concluding they were experiencing genuine paranormal activity. Crew members working aboard the Carnival Magic began sharing their own experiences through online forums and social media, often using anonymous accounts to avoid potential employment consequences. These accounts painted a picture of widespread supernatural activity that affected not just passenger areas, but crew quarters and workspaces throughout the ship. Housekeeping staff reported elevators stopping at Deck 7 without being called, opening their doors to empty corridors before continuing to their programmed destinations. Security personnel described motion sensors triggering in vacant areas of Deck 7, with security cameras showing no explanation for the alerts. One of the most credible crew accounts came from a former security officer who worked aboard the Magic for 2 years. He described a recurring incident where security cameras in the Deck 7 corridor would show a dark shadow moving between cabins during the early morning hours when the area should have been completely empty. The shadow appeared to move with purpose, stopping at specific cabin doors as if attempting to enter, before continuing down the corridor and disappearing near the elevator banks. The security officer attempted to investigate these incidents multiple times, but never found any physical explanation for the shadow's presence. The ship's medical staff also reported unusual incidents, particularly in cases involving passengers from Deck 7 who sought treatment for what they described as supernatural attacks. The ship's doctor documented multiple cases of passengers reporting unexplained scratches, bruises, and other marks that appeared overnight while they slept in their cabins. Medical examination revealed injuries consistent with the patient's descriptions, but with no logical explanation for how such marks could have occurred in locked, secure cabins. Carnival's official response to these reports evolved over time from dismissal to reluctant acknowledgement. Initially, company representatives attributed the incidents to passenger imagination, alcohol consumption, or unfamiliarity with shipboard sounds and movements. However, as reports multiplied and gained media attention through John Heald's blog and social media coverage, Carnival began taking a more proactive approach to managing the situation. The company implemented what insiders described as an unofficial Deck 7 protocol for handling supernatural reports. Guest services staff received special training on responding to paranormal complaints with sensitivity and professionalism, while housekeeping and security personnel were instructed to document any unusual incidents in their daily reports. Most significantly, Carnival began quietly relocating guests who reported supernatural activity, often upgrading them to higher category cabins on different decks without requiring detailed explanations. Maritime folklore experts and paranormal investigators have proposed various theories to explain the Carnival Magic's supernatural activity. Some suggest that the ship may have been built on materials salvaged from other vessels with tragic histories, creating a form of psychic contamination that transferred negative energy to the new ship. Others theorize that the ship's construction may have inadvertently created architectural features that concentrate or amplify paranormal activity, similar to how certain building designs are believed to enhance supernatural phenomena on land. A more controversial theory suggests that the Carnival Magic's route through the Caribbean may take it over underwater locations where historical tragedies occurred, such as shipwrecks or areas where slave ships dumped their human cargo. Proponents of this theory argue that the ship's passage over these sites may somehow attract or disturb spiritual presences that attach themselves to the vessel and its passengers. Professional paranormal investigators who have sailed aboard the Carnival Magic report mixed results in their attempts to document supernatural activity. Some have captured electronic voice phenomena, EVP, recordings in the Deck 7 corridor, while others have measured electromagnetic field fluctuations and temperature anomalies in areas where guests reported supernatural encounters. However, the controlled environment of scientific investigation often yields less dramatic results than the spontaneous experiences reported by unsuspecting passengers. The psychological impact on guests who experience supernatural activity aboard the Carnival Magic cannot be understated. Many report long-lasting anxiety about traveling, difficulty sleeping, and persistent feelings of being watched or followed even after returning home. Some passengers have sworn off cruise vacations entirely, while others specifically request cabins on different decks when booking future Carnival cruises. The Carnival Magic's paranormal reputation has created an unexpected phenomenon in the cruise industry. A subset of passengers who specifically book Deck 7 cabins, hoping to experience supernatural activity. These ghost hunters often document their experiences extensively, contributing to the growing body of evidence surrounding the ship's haunted reputation. However, crew members report that these passengers seeking paranormal encounters often experienced nothing unusual, while unsuspecting families frequently report the most dramatic incidents. The Carnival Magic haunting represents a unique category of cruise ship horror. Incidents that challenge our fundamental understanding of reality while occurring in the context of modern luxury vacation experiences. Whether attributed to supernatural forces, psychological phenomena, or elaborate hoaxes, the consistency and volume of reports from the ship cannot be easily dismissed. For passengers who have experienced the unexplained terror of Deck 7, the Carnival Magic serves as a chilling reminder that some mysteries persist even in our age of scientific understanding, turning dreams of paradise into unforgettable nightmares that haunt long after the voyage ends. Let's move to our 10th story. The Norwegian Spirit Incidents, a ship cursed by tragedy. In the cruise industry, certain vessels develop reputations that extend far beyond their amenities or destinations. Reputations built on a pattern of incidents, accidents, and unexplained occurrences that seem to follow the ship wherever it sails. Among the most notorious of these vessels is the Norwegian Spirit, a cruise ship that has earned a dark reputation for an extraordinary series of disturbing incidents, mysterious deaths, and safety failures that have plagued the vessel throughout its operational history. What makes the Norwegian Spirit particularly unsettling is not any single catastrophic event, but rather the persistent pattern of tragedy that seems to strike passengers and crew with alarming frequency, leading some to wonder whether certain ships can truly be cursed. The Norwegian Spirit began its life in 1998 as the Superstar Leo, operating in Asian waters under the Star Cruises brand. Even in its early years, the ship experienced incidents that would foreshadow its troubled future. During its Asian operations, the vessel was involved in several minor accidents, including a collision with a cargo ship and multiple medical emergencies that resulted in passenger deaths. However, it wasn't until the ship was transferred to Norwegian Cruise Line in 2004 and renamed the Norwegian Spirit that its reputation for tragedy truly began to solidify. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Norwegian Spirit's history involves the unusually high number of passenger deaths that have occurred aboard the vessel. While cruise ships do experience fatalities due to the demographic of older passengers and the duration of voyages, maritime safety experts note that the Norwegian Spirit has experienced a statistically significant number of deaths compared to similar vessels. These deaths have ranged from apparent medical emergencies to suspicious circumstances that raised questions about passenger safety and crew competency. In 2005, the ship was the scene of a particularly troubling incident when a 24-year-old passenger named Daniel Belling disappeared during a 7-day Caribbean cruise. Belling, a recent college graduate traveling with friends to celebrate his upcoming wedding, was last seen leaving the ship's nightclub around 2:30 a.m. When his friends awakened the next morning, Belling was nowhere to be found. Despite an extensive search of the ship and surrounding waters, no trace of him was ever discovered. What made this case especially disturbing was the discovery of Belling's cabin keycard in a crew-only area of the ship, raising questions about potential foul play that were never adequately investigated. The Norwegian Spirit's safety record reveals a pattern of incidents that extend beyond passenger disappearances to include serious accidents, equipment failures, and emergency situations. In 2006, the ship experienced a major galley fire that filled off several decks with smoke and forced the evacuation of hundreds of passengers to muster stations. The fire was eventually contained, but not before exposing serious deficiencies in the ship's fire suppression systems and evacuation procedures. Passengers reported confusion among crew members, delayed emergency announcements, and life-saving equipment that was either malfunctioning or inaccessible. Perhaps most disturbing were reports of multiple suicide attempts aboard the Norwegian Spirit, with several passengers attempting to jump overboard during various voyages. Maritime psychology experts note that while suicide attempts do occur on cruise ships, the frequency of such incidents aboard the Norwegian Spirit was unusually high. Passengers and crew members reported a palpable sense of depression and despair that seemed to permeate certain areas of the ship, particularly during longer voyages. Some described feeling overwhelmed by unexplained sadness or anxiety while aboard the vessel, emotions that dissipated once they disembarked. The ship's medical facilities became the center of controversy, following several incidents where passengers died under questionable circumstances while receiving treatment. In one well-documented case from 2007, a 58-year-old passenger suffered a heart attack during dinner and was rushed to the ship's medical center. Despite the availability of modern cardiac equipment and trained medical personnel, the passenger died after what his family described as inadequate treatment and delayed response. The family's subsequent investigation revealed that the ship's medical equipment had not been properly maintained, and that key medications were either expired or unavailable. Crew members working aboard the Norwegian Spirit began reporting their own disturbing experiences through maritime worker forums and social media platforms. These accounts painted a picture of a vessel where morale was consistently low. Turnover rates were abnormally high, and crew members frequently requested transfers to other ships in the Norwegian Cruise Line fleet. Workers described an atmosphere of constant tension and fear, with many reporting feelings of unease and dread while working in certain areas of the ship. One particularly chilling account came from a former housekeeping supervisor who worked aboard the Norwegian Spirit for 8 months in 2008. She described discovering the body of a passenger who had apparently died of natural causes in their cabin, but noted that the room felt wrong in a way she couldn't explain. The supervisor reported that the cabin seemed colder than normal, that electronic equipment malfunctioned repeatedly, and that she experienced an overwhelming sense of being watched while cleaning the room. Most disturbing was her claim that other crew members refused to enter the cabin, forcing her to clean it alone despite company policies requiring 2-person teams for occupied cabins. The Norwegian Spirit's reputation for tragedy extended to its port operations, where the ship seemed to attract accidents and incidents with unusual frequency. In 2009, while docked in Cozumel, Mexico, a passenger fell down a gangway and suffered fatal injuries. Later that same year, during a port call in Jamaica, 2 passengers were seriously injured when a tender boat experienced mechanical failure and crashed into the pier. These incidents, combined with the ship's history of onboard problems, led some port authorities to implement additional safety inspections specifically for the Norwegian Spirit. Maritime insurance records, obtained through industry sources, revealed that the Norwegian Spirit had filed an unusually high number of claims for passenger injuries, medical emergencies, and equipment failures. Insurance adjusters noted that the vessel's loss ratio, the amount paid out in claims compared to premiums collected, was significantly higher than industry averages for similar ships. This pattern of claims encompassed everything from slip-and-fall accidents to major medical emergencies, suggesting systemic issues with safety protocols and risk management. The ship's mechanical systems also seemed prone to failure at critical moments. In 2010, the Norwegian Spirit experienced a complete power failure while sailing through rough seas in the North Atlantic, leaving the vessel dead in the water for over 6 hours. Passengers reported that emergency generators failed to activate properly, leaving most of the ship in darkness while waves battered the hull. The incident resulted in numerous injuries as passengers and crew were thrown about in the darkness, and raised serious questions about the ship's maintenance and emergency preparedness. Former Norwegian cruise line employees who worked aboard the Spirit reported a culture of corner cutting and deferred maintenance that may have contributed to the vessel's poor safety record. Whistleblowers described the pressure from management to minimize downtime for repairs, leading to temporary fixes for serious mechanical problems and the postponement of critical safety inspections. This culture allegedly extended to crew training, with safety drills being abbreviated or skipped entirely to maintain operational schedules. The Norwegian Spirit's dining facilities became the source of multiple food poisoning outbreaks that affected hundreds of passengers during various voyages. Health inspections revealed serious deficiencies in food storage, preparation, and sanitation practices that violated both international maritime standards and basic food safety protocols. Passengers reported severe gastrointestinal illnesses that persisted long after their cruises ended, with some requiring hospitalization upon returning home. In 2012, the ship was involved in one of its most serious incidents when a passenger fell from their balcony during rough weather, resulting in fatal injuries. The investigation revealed that the passenger had been drinking heavily and may have been attempting to climb between balconies when the accident occurred. However, safety experts noted that the ship's balcony barriers were lower than current industry standards and that warning signs about balcony safety were inadequate or missing entirely. The accumulation of incidents, accidents, and deaths aboard the Norwegian Spirit eventually attracted the attention of maritime safety regulators and industry watchdog groups. The vessel was subjected to increased inspections and was required to implement additional safety measures, including enhanced crew training, improved maintenance schedules, and upgraded safety equipment. However, maritime safety experts noted that these measures addressed symptoms rather than the underlying issues that seemed to plague the vessel. The Norwegian Spirit's troubled history raises disturbing questions about how patterns of tragedy can become self-perpetuating aboard certain vessels. Maritime folklore has long recognized the concept of unlucky ships, vessels that seem to attract misfortune regardless of their crew, route, or operational procedures. While skeptics dismiss such notions as superstition, the Norwegian Spirit's documented history of incidents defies easy explanation and suggests that some factors affecting maritime safety may be beyond conventional understanding. Passengers who have sailed aboard the Norwegian Spirit often report an intangible sense of unease that permeates their vacation experience. Many describe feeling anxious or depressed while aboard the vessel, emotions that seem disproportionate to any specific incidents they witnessed or experienced. Some passengers have reported nightmares, insomnia, and other psychological symptoms that began during their cruise and persisted after disembarkation. The Norwegian Spirit incidents serve as a sobering reminder that not all cruise ships are created equal, and that patterns of tragedy can transform what should be vacation paradise into floating nightmares. Whether attributed to poor maintenance, inadequate safety protocols, or more mysterious forces, the Norwegian Spirit's dark reputation stands as testament to the fact that some vessels seem destined to attract misfortune, leaving passengers and crew to wonder whether they are sailing aboard a ship or a curse. Let's move to our 11th and final story. The watertight door horror. Death traps hidden in paradise. Behind the glamorous facade of modern cruise ships lies a network of industrial machinery, safety systems, and structural features that passengers rarely see, but upon which their lives depend. Among the most terrifying aspects of cruise ship design are the numerous ways that safety features intended to protect passengers can become death traps when they malfunction, are improperly operated, or simply catch victims in the wrong place at the wrong time. The most chilling of these hazards are the massive watertight doors, freezer vaults, and automated systems that operate throughout cruise ships with enough force to kill instantly and in locations where screams for help may never be heard. Cruise ship watertight doors represent one of the most dangerous yet essential safety features aboard any vessel. These massive steel barriers, designed to seal off sections of the ship in case of flooding or fire, operate with tremendous hydraulic force capable of crushing anything caught in their path. Maritime safety regulations require these doors to close automatically during emergency situations, but they can also be operated manually by crew members or activated by computerized systems that don't differentiate between water, debris, or human bodies when executing their programming. The most documented case of watertight door horror occurred aboard a major cruise line vessel in 2019, when a crew member was caught between closing doors during what was supposed to be a routine maintenance procedure. The victim, a 34-year-old engine room technician from the Philippines, was performing standard inspection duties in a lower deck area when an electrical malfunction triggered the emergency door closure system. According to witness accounts from other crew members, the technician was halfway through the doorway when the massive steel doors began closing with unstoppable force. The hydraulic system that powers these doors operates with pressure sufficient to seal against flooding water, meaning it generates thousands of pounds of crushing force. The crew member's screams alerted his colleagues, but the emergency stop systems failed to respond quickly enough to prevent the doors from closing completely. By the time maintenance personnel could reverse the door mechanism, the technician had been crushed to death, his body severed by the immense pressure of the steel barriers. What made this incident particularly horrifying was the revelation that similar near misses had occurred on the same vessel multiple times in the previous year. Internal incident reports, later obtained through maritime safety investigations, documented at least 6 cases where crew members had narrowly avoided serious injury or death from malfunctioning watertight doors. In each case, the incidents were attributed to electrical problems, improper maintenance, or human error. But no. Comprehensive safety review was conducted until after the fatal accident occurred. The investigation revealed that many cruise ships operate with watertight door systems that lack adequate safety features common in other industrial applications. Unlike elevator doors that have sensors to detect obstructions, most ship watertight doors rely solely on visual confirmation from crew members before closing. The doors operate silently and with such force that anyone caught between them has no chance of escape once the closing sequence begins. Former cruise ship engineers who spoke anonymously about safety concerns described the watertight door system as one of the most dangerous aspects of working below decks. They reported that crew members routinely took shortcuts when moving through these areas, often timing their passage to coincide with door closures rather than waiting for complete cycles. This dangerous practice, known among crew as door surfing, reportedly common because waiting for full door cycles significantly slowed down work routines in already cramped schedules. Equally terrifying are the massive freezer vaults found aboard cruise ships designed to store thousands of pounds of food for weeks-long voyages. These industrial-scale refrigeration units operate at temperatures well below freezing and are equipped with heavy, insulated doors that can only be opened from the inside using emergency releases. When those systems function properly, multiple incidents have been documented where crew members became trapped inside these freezers, facing death from hypothermia in a matter of hours. One particularly chilling case involved a night baker aboard a Caribbean cruise ship who entered a large freezer unit to retrieve ingredients for the morning's pastries. The freezer door, which should have remained unlocked during his brief visit, somehow engaged its locking mechanism, trapping him inside the sub-zero environment. His colleagues didn't realize he was missing until several hours later, when his failure to complete morning preparations raised alarms. By the time maintenance personnel could force open the freezer door, the baker was found unconscious and suffering from severe hypothermia. He survived, but required extensive medical treatment and never returned to sea work. The freezer incident exposed a broader pattern of safety system failures aboard cruise ships, where backup systems designed to prevent such accidents were either inadequately maintained or bypassed entirely to improve operational efficiency. Internal safety audits revealed that emergency release mechanisms in freezer units were often damaged, poorly marked, or blocked by stored materials. Most disturbing was the discovery that some freezer units had been modified to improve energy efficiency in ways that compromised the emergency escape systems. Surveillance blind spots throughout cruise ships create additional opportunities for fatal accidents to occur unwitnessed and unassisted. Despite extensive camera networks in passenger areas, many crew workspaces lack adequate monitoring, meaning that accidents can occur without anyone knowing help is needed. Former security personnel describe vast areas of cruise ships where crew members work alone, often during night shifts, with no immediate means of summoning assistance if they become trapped or injured. The automated systems that control modern cruise ships present their own category of hidden dangers. Computer-controlled machinery operates throughout these vessels, from water pumps and air circulation systems to food processing equipment and waste management facilities. When these systems malfunction, they can create death traps that catch crew members who are simply performing routine maintenance or inspection duties. One documented case involved a sewage processing technician who became caught in an automated waste grinding system when safety interlocks failed during a routine cleaning procedure. The machinery, designed to process thousands of gallons of waste daily, operated with industrial-grade grinding mechanisms that were never designed with human safety in mind. The technician's death was particularly gruesome, and subsequent investigation revealed that the safety systems intended to prevent such accidents had been overridden to allow continued operation during cleaning procedures. Medical equipment aboard cruise ships, while generally well-maintained in passenger-accessible areas, can become dangerous in crew medical facilities, where space constraints and cost considerations sometimes compromise safety. Former ship medical personnel describe makeshift treatment areas where equipment placement creates hazards. Emergency medical supplies are stored in locations that become inaccessible during emergencies, and backup systems are inadequate for serious medical situations that occur far from shore-based hospitals. The psychological impact on crew members who witness or narrowly escape these hidden dangers cannot be understated. Many former cruise ship employees describe developing anxiety disorders, insomnia, and persistent fear about workplace safety that extended long after their maritime careers ended. The knowledge that death lurks behind routine maintenance procedures, in everyday workspaces, and within the very safety systems designed to protect them, creates a constant state of stress that affects job performance and mental health. Maritime labor organizations have documented hundreds of cases where crew members suffered serious injuries or death from shipboard hazards that passengers never see or consider. These incidents rarely receive media attention because they occur in crew-only areas, involve foreign nationals whose deaths may not be thoroughly investigated, and are often covered by confidentiality agreements that prevent public disclosure of safety problems. The cruise industry's response to these hidden dangers has been mixed, with some companies implementing enhanced safety protocols, while others resist changes that might increase operational costs or reduce efficiency. Industry advocates argue that cruise ships are inherently dangerous industrial facilities and that some level of risk is unavoidable. However, maritime safety experts contend that many of these hazards could be eliminated with proper safety equipment, adequate maintenance, and comprehensive crew training. Perhaps most disturbing is the realization that passengers sailing on their dream vacations are surrounded by death traps that could claim lives with split-second timing. The watertight doors that protect against flooding, the freezer systems that preserve their food, and the automated machinery that processes their waste all operate with lethal force just meters away from dining rooms, theaters, and swimming pools where families create vacation memories. The watertight door horror represents the darkest aspect of cruise ship reality. The knowledge that paradise floats above an industrial hellscape, where workers risk their lives daily to maintain the illusion of carefree vacation luxury. For the crew members who navigate these dangers, every shift becomes a gamble with death, where a moment's inattention or a system malfunction can transform routine work into fatal catastrophe. These 11 disturbing true cruise ship horror stories reveal the hidden darkness that exists beneath the surface of the cruise industry's promise of paradise. From mysterious disappearances and brutal murders to supernatural encounters and industrial accidents, these incidents remind us that even the safest seeming environments can harbor unimaginable horrors. If you found these true stories as chilling as I did, make sure to subscribe to Verified Fears for more real horror content that will keep you awake at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest terrifying true stories, and let me know in the comments which story disturbed you the most. Have you experienced anything strange on a cruise ship? Share your own encounters below. Your story might be featured in our next video. Until next time, stay safe out there, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful places hide the darkest secrets.